bothered me first wasn't the hazard lights. It was the driver's door hanging open with nobody standing there. I was coming down one of those narrow mountain roads in western Arkansas, where your headlights only ever show you the next curve, and whatever happens, to be right at the edge of the trees. No houses, no porch lights, no other tail lights, nothing. Just pine trunks, black ditches, those deer crossing signs every so often, and my own truck making that steady little rattle from the passenger side vent that I'd been meaning to fix for about a year. I came around a bend and there it was, a pickup sitting half on the shoulder, half in the grass, hazards blinking slow and orange. The driver's door was open wide enough to catch the light, and for a second, I thought somebody had gotten thrown out of it or was lying in the ditch. I remember actually lifting in my seat to see better, because that's where my mind went first, but there was nobody there. Then I got almost past it and saw movement in the trees. That was the moment I wish I'd trusted. I go out to that property once a month, sometimes twice if a storm tears something up. It's the land my grandfather left me, a little over 3 hours from where I live now, up in the Ouachitas, where you can drive forever and still feel like the woods are closing in around the road. There's an old house on it that isn't worth much anymore, a shed that leans worse every year, and fencing that apparently takes personal offense to staying upright. My grandfather kept cattle there when I was a kid. By the time it got to me, it was basically just land and problems. Still, I didn't want to sell it, so I handle what needs handling. I mow when it gets too high. I patch the roof when it starts lifting shingles. I clear brush away from the gate, and I keep the fence more or less functional so neighboring cattle don't wander through. It's one of those things that sounds sentimental when you say it out loud, but most of the time it just means spending a Saturday, sweating through an old t-shirt and arguing with rusted staples. That day, I'd been replacing a section of fence on the north edge where a post had split. I had wire clips in my shirt pocket, leather gloves shoved in my back pocket, and one knee on my jeans torn open from kneeling in gravel all afternoon. I remember, because that rip kept catching on the seat when I got back in the truck. I also remember I was tired enough that I stood there by the gate before leaving and actually considered staying the night in the old house. I probably should have, but I knew the roads. That was the problem. I'd driven them enough that they didn't scare me. I was comfortable being out there alone. Honestly, I usually liked it. No traffic, no noise, no phone going off, just road and dark, and however long it took to get home. I had a gas station coffee in the cup holder that tasted burned, even when it was fresh, and a pack of crackers on the seat next to me. I figured I'd get back late, shower, throw my clothes in the washer, and be fine at work the next morning. It was fully dark by then, the kind of dark where your mirrors stop meaning much. My truck's GPS was glowing dim on the dashboard, and I had my home saved as a favorite because I used it enough that I got lazy. I wasn't even really paying attention in any special way. I was thinking about whether I'd left the fence stretcher out by the shed. Then I saw the pickup. At first, I did what most people do. I slowed. No cell service out there, so if someone breaks down, they really can be in trouble. I've had to leave my own truck on that road before and walk nearly a mile to higher ground just to get one bar. So when I saw the hazards going and that door open, I thought maybe the driver had gone looking for a signal, or maybe stepped off to use the bathroom. Then a man came out of the trees and raised one arm like he was trying not to spook me. He wasn't old, maybe 40s. Hard to tell exactly in the headlights. Ball cap, dark jacket, jeans. Not running at me, not waving wildly, just stepping forward and holding his hand up. Casual enough that I didn't get that immediate shot of panic people talk about. More that little annoyed thought of, great, now I'm involved. I stopped a few yards ahead of him and rolled the passenger window down, just enough to talk. He leaned a little, not too much, and said, "Hey man, my truck's acting up. You headed toward town?" I said, "Depends on what town." He named one that was in the general direction I was going. Not all the way there, but close enough. He said it in that normal, tired voice people use when they don't want to seem like a problem. He didn't smell like anything weird from where I sat. No slurring, no big dramatic story. He said he'd pulled over because the truck started losing power. Then when he got out, it seemed fine again, but he didn't trust it. and couldn't get a signal out there. Asked if I could take him far enough to find a phone, or at least get closer to town. Looking back, there were things I should have clocked right then. If his truck seemed fine again, why leave it running? If he didn't trust it, why was the engine sound still steady behind me? But in that moment, I was thinking like somebody who'd been on those roads his whole life. People help each other out there. You do. Or someday you end up being the one waving a stranger down. So I unlocked the passenger door. He got in with this muttered, "Appreciate it," pulled the door shut, and tucked his jacket under him before settling back. I noticed that because most people don't bother doing that in somebody else's vehicle. Like he was making himself comfortable. I put the truck in gear and pulled away. The first minute was fine. He thanked me again. Asked if I was coming from work. I said no. Family property. He nodded like that made sense. His voice was low and even. Nothing sharp about him. If anything, he seemed tired. My headlights caught the first curve, and his truck disappeared behind us. Then I asked where exactly he needed to go. He said, "Anywhere near Glenwood is fine." A minute later, he asked if we'd pass through Mena. Those aren't in the same direction. Not exactly. Not enough that somebody from the area would mix them up. I remember glancing over and saying, "Mena's the other way." He paused just a little too long and said, "Right, sorry, I'm mixed up. I've been out here longer than I meant to be." That was still explainable. People get turned around, especially at night. So I let it go. I asked if he was hunting out there because of the jacket and boots. He said no, visiting a friend. Then, a little late, he said he'd been trying to get back from his brother's place. Not said like he forgot what story he'd told. Said like he didn't care enough to keep it straight. That got my attention. I started noticing other things. His hands were clean. Cleaner than mine by a mile after a day with fence wire and dirt. There wasn't any mud on his boots, even though he said he'd been in the trees. His jacket had a little burr stuck to one sleeve, like he'd brushed against something once. But that was it. Not enough for somebody who supposedly came scrambling out of the woods because of a broken-down truck. I kept telling myself there were still ordinary explanations. Maybe he'd been standing by the road longer than I thought. Maybe he was embarrassed and making up details because asking a stranger for a ride is awkward. People lie about small things when they don't want to admit the real thing. That's normal. Then I caught him looking down at the door panel, not just glancing around, looking straight at the lock controls. I drive an older truck. The lock switch sticks a little on cold nights, and I usually have to hit it twice. I saw his eyes go to it, then to the handle, then back toward the windshield. It was quick, the kind of quick look you could miss if you weren't already paying attention. Something in me tightened up right there. I changed the subject and asked if he wanted me to drop him at a gas station once we got close. He said sure. Then he asked how much farther. I said maybe 40 minutes, depending. He nodded and went quiet. The road kept curving. Trees, ditch, trees, cut bank, more trees. My truck smelled like old coffee and damp canvas from a tarp I kept behind the seat. The heater was on low because the night had gotten colder than I expected, and I could feel sweat drying between my shoulder blades from working all day. My hands were still grimy around the knuckle, no matter how much I'd wiped them off before leaving. I tried the radio just to break the silence, but out there it was mostly static. I shut it back off. He asked if I came up that way often. I said, every month or so. He said, "You got family out here?" I said, "Property." He made this little sound like he was filing that away. I started doing the thing people do when they know something feels off, but they don't want to name it yet. I began checking details, like my brain was building a case against my instincts. His seatbelt wasn't on. His knees were angled toward me, not forward. He kept looking at the side mirrors, even though there was nothing behind us. The woods outside had that dead, closed feeling they get late at night, where even the usual insect noise seems farther away, and every time the headlights swept across the trunk, it looked like somebody could be standing between them. And I wouldn't know until we were right on them. Then he noticed the GPS. I didn't see his head move. I saw the light from the screen on his face when he turned toward it. He leaned a little and squinted. On the home screen, because I hadn't changed it, was the map route and my saved favorites at the bottom. Home was one of them. I'd put my address in years before and never thought about it again. He looked at that screen for too long. I reached over and tapped it to another menu, like I was just checking mileage. He didn't say anything, just sat back. But after that, he stopped trying to make small talk at all. That was worse. Silence with a stranger in your passenger seat feels different when the road is empty. It's not just quiet. It's crowded with every dumb thought your mind can make. I could hear the tires on the rougher patches of asphalt. I could hear something plastic in the door pocket tapping every time we hit a seam in the road. I became aware of how far the next town really was, how there wasn't even a farmhouse light through the trees, how if I stopped, there'd be nowhere to go except into the dark, and I didn't know whether that was better or worse than staying in the truck. I considered making up a call. No service. I considered saying my brother was waiting for me nearby. Too easy to test. I considered just pulling over and telling him to get out. But we were on one of the narrowest sections of road, and he was already inside my truck. That felt like making a situation out of a situation that still maybe wasn't one. So I kept driving. My heart wasn't racing yet. It was lower than that, more physical. My hands started slipping on the steering wheel because I hadn't realized I was gripping it too hard. I loosened my fingers, and then they tightened again by themselves. He finally spoke when we'd been quiet for maybe 5 minutes. He said, "You out here by yourself tonight?" I said, "Yeah." He nodded. "Long drive. Used to it. You stay on that property sometimes?" There are questions strangers ask because they're being polite, and there are questions strangers ask because they want a shape of your life. This was the second kind. I knew it when I heard it. I also knew if I suddenly got defensive, that would tell him I was paying attention, so I shrugged and said, "Sometimes." He looked back at the GPS, then out on the road, then down toward his lap. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer. "Do you live there alone?" I don't know if it was the wording or the way he asked it, almost careful, but something in my body just dropped, not fear exactly, more like the last excuse in my head stepping aside. I looked down without moving my head much, and that's when I saw it. There was a folded hunting knife open beside his right leg. The blade pointed back toward the seat, part of it hidden under the edge of his jacket, as if he'd either just set it there, or had been holding it low where I couldn't see. It wasn't huge. That's the part I remember clearly. It wasn't some movie thing. It was a normal, practical knife. The kind a lot of people carry. Clean steel, catching just enough from the dash lights. And open. Everything after that felt fast and extremely slow at the same time. I didn't answer his question. I think I made some sound, maybe, but not because I wanted clarification. More because my mouth needed to do something. He didn't repeat it. He just kept looking at me. I knew if I reached for anything, if I stared at the knife, if I changed my breathing too obviously, that would be its own answer. So I forced myself to look back at the road like I was thinking about directions. And in the space of maybe 2 seconds, I started running through whatever I could use. There was no shoulder wide enough here. No lights ahead. No service. A narrow little bridge over a creek cut, maybe a mile up, with concrete rails close enough that you had to slow a little, even if you knew it well. Cars coming the other direction usually threw light across it early, because of the curve before it. There wasn't actually another car coming. I knew that, but if I could make him look away for even half a second, maybe that was enough. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down much either. I just drove. My ears were ringing hard enough that I could barely hear the tires. I remember the smell of his jacket more than anything. Damn. Cold fabric. Like it had been hanging in a garage for a long time. He shifted once, and I saw his hand move toward the knife. Not grabbing it yet, just settling closer. The bridge came into view, pale in the headlights. I hit the brakes hard. Not enough to skid. Just enough to throw both of us forward and make the seatbelts lock. He hadn't put his on, so he lurched and braced against the dashboard. At the same time, I shouted, "Watch out! Somebody is coming!" He turned toward the windshield instinctively. I threw my left forearm across his chest and shoved with everything I had. Maybe if I'd been fresher, he would have fought harder. Maybe he just wasn't expecting me to do anything first. The door had never fully latched right on that side unless you slammed it. And when he hit it, it popped open. His shoulder went out. Then the rest of him, boots scraping the pavement. I saw the knife flash once and disappear as he fell sideways against the concrete edge. Then I was on the gas. I don't remember making the next few turns. I remember the truck fishtailing a little on gravel, where the pavement broke at the edge. I remember looking in the mirror and seeing the passenger door still half open, bouncing. I remember yanking it shut at some point without really slowing down. I kept expecting headlights behind me. That was the whole drive after. Not thought, not planned, just waiting for headlights. I blew through the next little crossroads faster than I ever would have otherwise. Once I got far enough to pick up a bar of signal, I called the sheriff's office, and I think I sounded half out of my mind because the dispatcher kept telling me to slow down and repeat where I was. I gave them the road, the bridge, the pickup with hazards, the man, the knife. She asked if I was injured. I said no. She asked if he'd taken anything. I said I didn't think so. She asked if I knew him. I said absolutely not. They told me to keep driving until I got somewhere populated and wait there. Populated out there meant a gas station with 2 pumps and a bait fridge humming near the register. I parked under the brightest light they had and sat there shaking so badly I dropped my phone between the seat and console twice, trying to call my brother. My hands had stopped working right. That was the first moment I understood how close it had actually been, because I was safe enough to feel it. A deputy met me there maybe half an hour later. Could have been less, could have been more. Time got weird after the bridge. He took my statement while I stood next to my truck. Kay, still in dirty work clothes with one glove hanging out of my back pocket. I remember feeling stupidly embarrassed about that, like I should have looked more believable somehow. They did go out there. They found the area. They did not find the man. And the part that has stayed with me worse than the knife, worse than the question he asked me, is what they said about the truck. It had fuel. It started. There wasn't anything obviously wrong with it at all. From what they told me later, it looked like it had simply been left there with the hazards on and the door open. I drove home near dawn. Every set of headlights in the distance made my stomach tighten. When I got to my driveway, I sat in the truck with the engine idling because I didn't want to walk into my own house with that question still in my ears. Do you live there alone? I changed the favorite on my GPS the next day. I stopped saving my address anywhere I could see it from the passenger seat. And after that, if I had to go check the property and ran late, I stayed the night, no matter how badly I wanted my own bed. I know people can say, maybe he just wanted money. Maybe he saw an opportunity and took it. Maybe the knife was there for some other reason. I have gone over all of that more times than I can count. But if that truck had been functioning perfectly, and from everything I was told it was, then I still don't know why it was left running with the hazards on and the door standing open, except to make one lone driver think someone needed help. The next one comes from somebody who spent a lot longer trying to prove to himself he was imagining it. I keep mileage logs in a small spiral notebook that lives in the center console of my car. Most people think that's strange when they notice it. But once you do a certain amount of long-distance driving for work, you start wanting clean records. Odometer at departure, fuel stop locations, time, receipts tucked into the back pocket, and any detour worth noting. I started doing it years ago because reimbursement seemed easier if I had it all written down, and then it just became part of the routine. Even now, if I pull onto an interstate for a trip that's more than a couple of hours, my first instinct is to click the overhead light at the ramp and write the starting mileage before the merge lane ends. So when I say I pay attention on the road, I mean I pay attention in a way that's probably a little excessive. I know roughly how long it takes me to feel the temperature drop after midnight in the high desert. I know which exits on Interstate 84 through eastern Oregon tend to have decent coffee, and which ones look open from the sign but close earlier than they should. I know how the road sounds when the pavement changes, and I know that if a car has been behind me for 20 minutes, I usually have at least a loose picture of its headlights, its height, and whether the driver is impatient or just traveling the same speed I am. Driving alone at night has never bothered me. Most of my work travel has been solo. I actually prefer the hours after midnight because the radio chatter dies down. The semis spread out, and everybody who is left on the road has a reason to be there. Less nonsense. less sudden braking. You settle into a pace, and the miles move. That night was clear, dry, and cold enough that the windshield felt sharp when I cracked it at a fuel stop later. No weather, no construction that I remember, and traffic light enough that I was making good time without trying. I left after dinner, wrote my starting mileage under the date in blue ink, and headed east. I had a legal pad on the passenger seat with notes for the next morning's appointment, a paper cup of bad coffee in one holder, and a highlighter rolling around in the other every time I took a curve. The first hour was ordinary to the point of being forgettable. That's part of why I remember the first wrong detail so clearly. I noticed the SUV in my mirror somewhere near Pendleton. Dark color, maybe black or dark blue. Hard to tell at night. Higher profile than my car, but not oversized. Nothing distinctive from the front, because the headlights weren't unusual, and the plate wasn't readable from that distance. It appeared behind me, settled in, and stayed there. That alone meant nothing. On interstate drives, especially overnight, you can end up pacing another vehicle for a long time without either driver meaning to. Same speed, same lane preference, same general destination. It happens. So when I first clocked it, all I did was note it the way I note any recurring thing on a long drive. Car behind. Moderate following distance. Stable. 10 miles later, it was still there. 20 miles later, still there. I changed lanes to pass a slower truck and saw the SUV move over within a few seconds. Again, not unusual. They may have been doing the same thing. I got back right, and it got back right. Nothing about that was enough on its own. If anything, it's the kind of pattern you only notice because you're alone for a long time, and your brain wants things to sort. So I let it sit in the back of my mind and kept driving. I keep that notebook because I like routine. At one point, not long after midnight, I reached down at a straight stretch, clicked on the console light just long enough to jot the mileage and time since my last note, then tucked the notebook back beside my seat. I remember checking the mirror during that little pool of interior light and seeing the SUV still there, just hanging in the dark behind me at a distance that didn't feel aggressive and didn't feel casual either. There are times on a road when another driver feels present in a neutral way. This didn't feel neutral exactly, more like I was aware of being observed in little pieces. When I signaled, it was there. When I adjusted my speed down a touch because of a curve, it did too. Every glance in the mirror found the same shape holding position. I told myself this was confirmation bias. Once a vehicle gets your attention, every normal thing it does starts looking intentional. That's true. Anybody who spends enough time alone knows that the mind will manufacture patterns if you don't keep it occupied. So I turned on the radio. Static, then a station, then static again. I left it low. At my first fuel stop, I pulled into a gas station I knew stayed open late, one of those places with bright white canopy lights and a half-stocked hot case nobody really trusts after midnight. I parked by a pump, got out, stretched my back, and immediately felt how cold the air had gotten. Dry cold. It catches in the inside of your nose. My tires ticked as they cooled. Somewhere behind the building, there was an ice machine buzzing. I glanced back toward the lot entrance and saw the SUV turn in, even though I didn't jump to the worst conclusion. Gas stations sit right off the interstate. Of course, some other vehicle from the same stretch of road might take the same exit. I swiped my card, started fueling, and kept one eye generally on the lot without trying to make it obvious. The SUV did not take a pump. It came slowly, made a wide circle past the storefront, past the air machine, then rolled back out toward the road. No one got out. No brake lights stayed on. It just left. That was the first moment I wrote something in the notebook that wasn't mileage. While the tank filled, I leaned against the rear quarter panel, took the little spiral pad from the console, and wrote, "Dark SUV followed off interstate. Entered lot. No fuel. Left." Then I underlined the time. I did that because I wanted to make myself laugh about it later. That's the truth. I wanted a record that would look silly in daylight. See, you were tired. You noticed some harmless driver and got into your own head. Inside, I bought another coffee and one of those peanut butter crackers that come in the orange packaging. The woman behind the counter had the television on but muted. I considered telling her that some SUV was acting odd, and decided against it, because I sounded ridiculous even to myself. When I got back on the interstate, the SUV was there again within 10 minutes. Same distance, same lane. That could still happen by chance. We were on the same highway, heading through the same sparsely populated stretch, and there are only so many exits that are open enough to matter in the middle of the night. So I held on to that explanation and kept driving. The road out there does something after a certain hour. It stops feeling like a route between places and starts feeling like its own sealed space. Long black lanes, reflectors ticking by, low signs appearing out of nowhere and then falling behind, the dark outside, the headlights so complete, it almost seems solid. Every so often, you pass a cluster of lights in the distance. And it looks closer than it is. Then you're past it, and out in the empty again. Sometime after one, then I changed lanes for no reason other than to test the pattern. Within seconds, the SUV changed too. I waited a bit and moved back. It moved back. That still wasn't proof. If the driver preferred not being boxed behind trucks, they'd make the same choice as I did. I know all the rational explanations because I used every one of them. The trouble was that each explanation only covered one piece. None of them covered all of it together. A little later, I took an exit I didn't need. Not a dramatic one, just a routine, looking off the ramp to a service area where I could turn around if I wanted. I stayed off the gas, let the car ease down the ramp, and watched the mirror. The SUV took the exit too. At the bottom, instead of pulling up to any business, it stayed back while I looped through and got back on. I remember my hands on the wheel then, not shaking but very deliberate. When you're trying not to panic, you get precise. Signals clicked louder. The lane line mattered more. I watched the merged clean, and told myself maybe the driver had also wanted a break and changed their mind. That was still technically possible. 40 minutes later, I stopped at a rest area. This was where I could have made a different decision. I could have stayed put under the lights and called somebody. But by then, I was still in that half state where the facts were bad, but not outrageous enough to say out loud without sounding unstable. A vehicle has been behind me for a long time is not by itself an emergency. The rest area was mostly empty. A couple of cars. One semi off to the side. Vending machines are humming inside the building. I parked where I could see the entrance and sat for a second before getting out. The SUV rolled in, slow, then kept moving past my row. No one stepped out there either. It was parked near the far edge, engine still on. I went inside anyway because I was not going to let another driver dictate whether I used a restroom on a work trip. That was the thought I had, and I know now how stubborn that sounds. But competence can be its own trap. When you do solitary work long enough, you start thinking every discomfort is manageable if you just stay methodical. Inside the building, the fluorescent lights made everything look bleached out. My reflection in the restroom mirror looked more tired than I felt. I splashed water on my face, dried my hands on one of those thin brown paper towels, and stood there arguing with myself. If this person is following you, to what end? If they mean harm, why wait? If they don't mean harm, why mirror every move? I walked back outside with the cold hitting me in the teeth and checked the far row. The SUV was gone. I cannot explain the relief I felt from that. It was immediate and embarrassing. My whole chest loosened. I actually laughed once under my breath, standing there in the lot by myself, because I'd just spent the last hour and a half turning a stranger into a threat. I got back in the car and wrote in the notebook, rest area. SUV left. Then I put a line through the earlier note about being followed. That mattered later. The crossed out line. I can still see it. For a while after that, there was nothing behind me but dark. The interstate opened up again, and I told myself the whole thing had burned off, because the driver finally took another route. I even got my notes for the morning appointment off the passenger seat, and glanced through them at a long straight section, just trying to get my mind back into the kind of trip this was supposed to be. Then, maybe 20 minutes after the rest area, headlights appeared behind me. Same height, same spacing. I watched them close just enough to confirm it, and felt that small cold shift in my stomach that happens before the full fear arrives. Not hot panic, more like the body's quiet vote that your earlier explanation no longer holds. I didn't speed up. I didn't slam the brakes. I drove. The SUV stayed there. By then, it was deep night, somewhere around 3 in the morning. The kind of hour where even truck traffic thins and the interstate feels abandoned between towns. My coffee had gone lukewarm. The notebook on the console looked ridiculous and suddenly very important. I kept checking the mirrors because not checking felt worse. But every time I checked, I could feel myself feeding the pressure. That was the watched part of it. Not just that the vehicle was there, but that it changed how I moved. I signaled earlier than usual. I stopped rubbing my eyes when I got tired, because I didn't like the idea of not looking competent in the mirror. I caught myself wondering what the driver could see when my brake lights came on. Whether they knew I was calculating them every minute, whether they were waiting for me to make some tired mistake. There are exits out there to motels, truck stops, and little towns. I passed at least 2 obvious chances to stop, because each time I thought, if I pull off and the SUV follows, then I confirm this, and if I confirm this, then I have a problem on my hands that I still don't know how to describe. Finally, I saw a sign for a motel off a side road, and decided I was done experimenting. I'd get off, park under the lights, and if the SUV went by, fine. If it followed, I'd figure it out from there. I took the exit. The SUV took it too. At the end of the ramp, the road narrowed, and the lighting dropped off hard. One gas station sign in the distance. Some dark lots, then a side road leading farther than I expected toward the motel. I made the turn. The SUV turned behind me, and then it shut off its headlights. That was the moment everything became simple. No more rational sorting. No more maybe this, maybe that. There is no innocent reason for a vehicle to keep following you down a dark side road at 3 in the morning with its lights off. None. The road ahead was barely lit by my own beams. In the mirror, or the SUV became a shape more than a car. Something moving in the dark where a vehicle should have been visible. My hands went so tight on the wheel that they hurt. I could hear my own breathing, and I remember thinking very clearly, do not stop. Do not go to the motel. Do not lead this person somewhere with fewer witnesses. Then I saw it. A county sheriff's substation sign. Small reflective lettering. Arrow pointing ahead. Another short distance. I don't think I've ever made a cleaner decision in my life. I took that turn so fast I felt the tires complain. The building was low and plain, not busy, but there were exterior lights and visible security cameras over the lot. I pulled straight under the brightest one, angled the car so the front faced back toward the road, and stopped with enough force that my notebook slid off the console onto the floor. The SUV rolled past the entrance, then slowed and stopped across the road. It sat there, engine running, I assume. I couldn't hear it over my own car and the blood in my ears, but I could see the outline, motionless. Not parking, not leaving, just sitting there facing me from across the dark road, like it was deciding whether the cameras mattered. I grabbed my phone and called emergency dispatch with one hand, while keeping my eyes on it. I gave the location twice because I started too fast the first time. The dispatcher told me to stay in the vehicle, lock the doors, and keep them updated if the SUV moved. It remained there for what felt like forever, and was probably under a minute. Then it turned around and drove away. No rush, no squealing tires, just a slow, controlled turn and gone. A deputy came out not long after, from another building on the property. I gave him everything I had, which was not much. Dark SUV, no plate, no clear view of the driver. Consistent following behavior over a long stretch, lights off on the side road. He took it seriously, which helped more than I expected. I think part of me had still been braced to be told I was overtired. I stayed there until morning because once daylight became the plan, moving again before daylight felt foolish. The deputy let me sit where the cameras covered the car. At some point, I found the notebook on the floorboard and saw the crossed-out line from the rest area. The one where I'd decided I was being stupid. I didn't cross anything out after that. For months, every late trip changed. I stopped preferring the quiet hours. I started choosing fuel stops based on lighting and how many people were likely to be awake. I still kept the mileage logs, but now there were other notes in them sometimes. vehicle descriptions, exit numbers, details I never used to think I needed. And then months later, on a different run, hundreds of miles from that road, I looked in the mirror near dusk and saw an SUV behind me, with the same dark shape and the same patient distance. It stayed back through one lane change, then another. I never got a plate. I never got close enough to be sure. It eventually peeled off, and that should have been the end of it. But sometimes I still think about how long that first one was willing to wait, how carefully it let me keep telling myself nothing was wrong, and how, on a completely different trip, far from Eastern Oregon, I still caught myself checking the mirror too often because I could not prove whether it was the same vehicle or prove it wasn't. The last story is the one that changed the way I look at any rest stop after midnight. I was standing in front of a vending machine trying to decide whether I wanted warm lemon tea from a can or one of those tiny energy drinks that taste like melted candy, and this guy next to me said, real casually, "You finally made it out of your car. Not hello, not excuse me. That." I turned, and he was just standing there, as he'd already been in the middle of a conversation with me. Mid-30s maybe older, average build, dark hoodie, baseball cap, holding a bottle of water he hadn't opened. Behind him, the rest stop looked completely normal. Bright overhead lights, a couple of parked cars, one minivan farther down, somebody walking toward the building with a dog on a leash. Normal enough that for half a second I thought maybe I'd misheard him. I said, "Sorry?" He smiled and nodded toward the parking area behind me. "You got here like 20 minutes ago. I figured you were sleeping." The thing about that line was how small it was. Not threatening, not openly weird, just personal enough that it made my skin tighten a little before my brain had a reason. I laughed the way you do when a stranger says something of, "and you don't want to make it a thing." I should have left right then. I was driving overnight from Kentucky, up toward a friend's graduation, and I only made the trip that way because hotels near the venue were stupid, expensive. Like so expensive that I spent an hour staring at booking apps, and then decided I'd rather just leave late, drive straight through, and get there exhausted than pay that much to sleep for a few hours. It felt like a normal early 20s decision. Cheap, slightly annoying, manageable. I also hate driving alone at night. That's important. I am not one of those people who find it peaceful. I don't like gas stations after midnight. I don't like weird noises my car makes in the dark. And I definitely don't like being the only person walking from a parking lot to a building when everybody else is either asleep or minding their own business. But I kept telling myself it was one night, the interstate was straightforward, and plenty of people do overnight drives all the time. By the time I reached southern Indiana, I was halfway through and running on that gross mix of tired and wired, where your body wants sleep. Pooh. But your brain keeps lurching awake every time you blink. I had fast food wrappers on the passenger floor, an overnight bag in the back seat, and my phone plugged in with the map running, even though the route was basically just stay on Interstate 65. I remember my shoulders hurting from being tense for so long. So when I saw the rest stop, I was relieved. It was lit up well, not empty. There were several cars parked around the lot, and enough visible people that I actually felt safer pulling in. That's the whole reason I chose it instead of waiting for the next exit. I figured I'd use the bathroom, get a drink, maybe walk for a minute, and then get back on the road before I got too sleepy. I did sit in my car first. That's what he meant. I was parked with the engine off for maybe 20 minutes, just stretching my hands, checking my messages, and trying to decide whether getting out would wake me up or make me realize I was too tired to keep going. I had my seat leaned back a little. I was watching people come and go in that vague way you do, when you're pretending you're not nervous. Apparently, he was watching me too. When he said he'd seen me arrive, I told myself not to overreact. Public place, bright lights, random talkative guy. That happens. I got my drink from the machine, and he started doing that easy, chatty thing some strangers do, where they keep offering pieces of conversation you didn't ask for. Asked where I was headed, asked if I was driving all night, told me he and his friend had been on the road for 2 hours. Kept my answers short. Graduation, a couple more hours. Yeah, long night. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't slurring. Honestly, that made it worse later. Because there was no obvious reason to dismiss him, except that I wanted to. I noticed pretty quickly that every time I shifted to an angle back toward my car, he shifted too. Not dramatically. He'd turn with me a little, half step to the side, just enough that I had to keep adjusting if I wanted a clear line back to where I'd parked. If we'd been the only people there, I probably would have said something, or just walked around him. But because other people were around, because a guy with a dog had just passed us, because someone else was coming out of the restroom building, it kept feeling too small to call out. That was the exposed part of it. There were people everywhere in the background, and none of them had any idea that anything was wrong. I could see my car over his shoulder, a dark sedan 2 rows over, under one of the taller lights. And near it, leaning on the curb like he was checking directions on his phone, was another man I hadn't noticed before. This second guy never looked directly at me at first. That was what stuck out. He kept his head tipped down at his phone screen, thumb moving, body angled toward my row of parking spaces. The kind of posture you'd never remember if nothing happened. Generic traveler posture. The first man said something about traffic near Louisville, and I answered automatically while looking past him. The second guy lifted his head once, quickly, and made eye contact with the first. That could still mean nothing. They could have been together, and I was just noticing because I was tired. I know that. But once I saw that look, I couldn't stop seeing the setup differently. The first guy holding the conversation, the second guy near my car. I said, "I should get going." The first man smiled like I'd made a joke. "Yeah, same here. You got a long drive left? Not too bad." He stepped with me again when I moved. Not close enough to touch me, just enough. I remember my fingers going slick around the cold can from the vending machine. I also remember trying very hard to keep my face normal, because I didn't want whatever this was to turn into a scene, if it was still maybe nothing. People always say trust your instincts, but when your instinct is happening in a brightly lit public place with other people nearby, your brain fights it. It keeps asking for proof. Then the second guy by the cars did something that finally gave me that proof. He walked to one of the vehicles in the next row, tried the back door, opened it a few inches, then shut it. He moved to another vehicle and did the same thing. Not fast, not sneaky, almost bored, like somebody looking for the one that was unlocked, like somebody trying not to look connected to anything at all. I said, "Is that your friend?" The first man turned just enough to glance over, then looked back at me with this flat little expression I still hate thinking about. No surprise, not confusion, more like I'd noticed a step before he wanted me to. He shrugged. People are weird at these places. That was such a stupid answer that it snapped something into place for me. I said I really had to leave, stepped around him harder than I had before, and started toward my car. He didn't grab me. He just came along beside me, talking the whole time, still in that easy voice, asking what school the graduation was at, asking if I was from around there, asking if I had family waiting up. Every question sounded casual on its own. Together, they sounded like he was trying to keep me occupied until something else finished happening. Behind me. By the time I reached my car, the second man had drifted a little farther down the row and was once again looking at his phone. I unlocked my door, got in, locked it immediately, and started the engine so fast I almost ground the key. The first man was still outside my window, we smiling, as if nothing at all strange had happened. He lifted a hand, sort of a little good luck wave, and walked away. I pulled out. No one followed right away. That matters because this is where I got it wrong. For the next 10 miles, I talked myself down. I said maybe they were trying doors because they'd lost track of their rental. Maybe the first guy was just annoying and bad at reading people. Maybe I was overtired and freaked out by normal rest stop nonsense because I already didn't like driving alone at night. The interstate looked ordinary again, and once the rest stop lights were gone behind me, the whole thing started feeling smaller and more embarrassing. I even opened the warm lemon tea and took a sip, and thought, you are really going to tell this story later and sound insane. By the time I reached the next exit, I had mostly convinced myself that nothing had happened. I wasn't getting off because of them. I got off because I needed gas soon, and wanted a brighter place to stop than another rest area. I signaled, took the ramp, and checked my mirror almost absent-mindedly. 2 vehicles came down behind me. Both had been parked at the rest stop. One was a light-colored sedan, I remembered because it had a dent near the rear wheel. The other was a dark SUV, or crossover, same general shape as one that had been 2 rows over from me. I knew them instantly, the way you know a face you've already sorted once. My whole body went cold in this really specific way. Not dramatic, just like all the heat pulled out of my hands at once. I got back on the highway instead of following the exit road, so did they. That's when the false relief disappeared so fast, it almost made me dizzy. I realized I hadn't imagined the setup. I'd just left the stage where it would have happened in a parking lot, with lights and bystanders, and moved into the part where they could do it on the road. The dark vehicle came up behind me first, and stayed right on my rear bumper. Not honking, not flashing, just close enough that I couldn't see much of its front end. The light sedan moved ahead, got into my lane, and slowed down. Not enough that I had to brake hard, enough that I couldn't maintain speed. I changed lanes. The sedan changed too and stayed in front. The vehicle behind me changed with me. It was clean, deliberate, like they had practiced exactly how much pressure to use without making it look like some obvious highway attack. If anyone else happened to see. There wasn't anyone else. That stretch of highway felt empty in a way I can still picture exactly. Black fields or tree line on either side. Guardrails showing up in flashes. Reflectors ticking past. No businesses, no streetlights except at the far ends of exits. My hands were slipping on the wheel, and I kept having to re-grip. I could hear my breath going shallow and stupid. I remember saying out loud, to myself, "No, no, no," like that was going to matter. I thought about calling the police, but I also knew I needed to drive first. I needed somewhere with enough people that these guys would not want to continue. The car behind me edged even closer. The sedan ahead slowed more. My speed dropped until I felt trapped in this moving pocket they had made around me. If I braked, the one behind might hit me or force me over. If I tried to punch around the one ahead, I didn't know if the car behind would block me. It was one of those moments where you understand very clearly that 2 strangers know exactly where you are and what you can do, and they're counting on you being too panicked and too tired to pick the right option. Then I saw lights ahead of the next exit. Not a rest area. Bigger, higher. A truck stop. I don't think I even checked my mirrors before I made for it. I hit the signal, moved hard, took the ramp faster than I should have, and felt the back tires wobble just a little before catching. The vehicle behind me stayed close through the curve. The sedan went ahead, and for one awful second, I thought it was going to stop across the entrance and block me in. It didn't. The truck stop opened up in front of me, bright as a stadium compared to the highway. Fuel islands lit up, storefronts glowing, rows of semis parked nose to nose with cabs idling, actual people moving around under the lights. Drivers smoking by the curb. Someone is hauling a trash bag toward a dumpster. A couple of workers are near the diesel lanes. More witnesses than either of those men could want. I drove straight toward the parked semis and slid into a space beside a row of occupied trucks, close enough that I could see one driver's television flickering blue through his curtain gap. The 2 vehicles came in just far enough that I thought they were still committed. Then both of them kept going. No hesitation. No circling like they were actually there for fuel. They just turned through the lot and went back out toward the road. I sat there with both hands still on the wheel and realized I was crying a little without making any noise. Not sobbing. Just tears because my body had finally found something to do with all that fear. My jaw hurt from clenching it. My phone was in the cup holder, and I couldn't pick it up right away because my fingers were buzzing. A trucker knocked lightly on my window. Maybe a minute later, Aaron asked if I was okay. I cracked it just enough to say I thought a couple of cars had followed me from the interstate. He looked toward the lot entrance, then back at me, and told me to park right where I was and go inside if I needed help. His voice was so normal that it almost made me fall apart more. I went inside, told the cashier what happened, and called a friend even though it was the middle of the night, because I needed another human voice who wasn't connected to that highway. I stayed there until the sky started turning gray. I made it to the graduation on no sleep and a stomach full of gas station coffee. And I didn't tell the full story until later, because saying it out loud made me feel naive. I'd volunteered for a bad situation by driving overnight alone just to save money. Maybe I did, but I also know what I saw. I know one man at that rest stop opened the conversation by letting me know he'd been watching me sit alone in my car. I know he kept placing himself between me and my vehicle while another man stayed near my row, pretending not to notice me at all. I know I left and spent 10 miles convincing myself none of it meant anything. And I know the same 2 vehicles ended up behind me at the next exit, one close enough to push and one ahead slow enough to hold me there. I never found out their names. I never got plates. I never learned whether they were looking to rob someone, scare someone, force someone off the road, or just see who looked easiest to isolate. What stays with me is how ordinary they acted under those rest stop lights, and how easily it all could have looked like nothing to anybody else there, which means I still don't know who those 2 men were, or how many tired drivers before me had already seen that same routine begin.